A millionaire finds an abandoned baby and takes her home. What he discovers next leaves him speechless. Snow fell softly on Manhattan that Christmas Eve, as fate intervened in the life of Henry Lawrence. The clock in his grand penthouse apartment chimed 11:45 p.m., the city lights twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds. Henry adjusted his cashmere scarf, his footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. Another lonely Christmas was upon him. At 45, his tech empire was worth billions, but his heart remained as empty as the cavernous living room. The only sounds awaiting him were the crackling fireplace and the quiet movements of Mrs. Davis, his loyal housekeeper. Then he heard it. A faint cry, almost muffled by the falling snow. Henry paused, his heart quickening inexplicably. The sound came from the shadows near the main entrance. He approached cautiously, his leather shoes crunching on the fresh snow. There, sheltered only by a delicate ivory silk blanket, lay a baby girl. Just a few weeks old, her eyes, when they fluttered open, were the deepest blue Henry had ever seen, identical to his own, the ones that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. "Oh my God!" Mrs. Davis's voice broke the stillness of the night. She appeared at the doorway, still in her crisp grey uniform, as if anticipating this very moment. Henry shrugged off his overcoat and wrapped it around the baby, noticing something that had fallen from the blanket. An antique gold locket, engraved with a familiar crest that sent a chill down his spine. He quickly slipped it into his pocket, his hands trembling not entirely from the cold. "Mr. Lawrence," Mrs. Davis approached, her expression unreadable. "What do you intend to do?" The question hung in the silent night. Henry looked down at the baby in his arms, painful memories flooding his mind, the sterile walls of the St. Joseph's orphanage, the lonely nights, the promise he had made to himself that no child would endure what he had. "She stays." His voice was firmer than he expected. "At least until we find out where she belongs." An almost imperceptible smile touched Mrs. Davis's lips. "I'll prepare the old nursery," she said, as if she had been waiting for this answer for a long time. As he climbed the stairs with the precious bundle, Henry didn't notice the knowing look in his housekeeper's eyes, nor how she discreetly wiped away a tear. He also didn't notice how his own eyes welled up as the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. The grand clock in the hall chimed midnight. It was Christmas, and on that night, as the snow continued to fall on Manhattan, something stirred in Henry Lawrence's heart, something he had buried long ago along with his own memories of abandonment. A sense that this was no coincidence, that something larger was at play. The baby yawned, snuggling closer to his chest as if she had always belonged there. Henry touched the locket in his pocket, feeling its weight and the secrets it held. "Welcome to the family, little Holly," he whispered, the name coming to him unbidden. Little did he know that this Christmas night was just the first chapter of a story that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. And that this tiny baby, abandoned in the snow, held the key to unlocking long-held secrets and healing wounds he didn't even know were still bleeding. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Manhattan in white, while inside the Lawrence penthouse, destiny began to weave its intricate web. Chapter 2. First Steps. 1-200 words. Christmas morning sunlight filtered through the silk curtains of the makeshift nursery, where Holly slept soundly in an antique crib Mrs. Davis had unearthed from the storage room. Henry, still in his clothes from the night before, watched her every move, mesmerized by her very existence. "Mr. Lawrence." Mrs. Davis entered quietly, carrying a tray with coffee and a plate of blueberry muffins. "The social worker will be here in an hour." Henry nodded, his gaze never leaving the crib. During the early hours, between feedings and diaper changes, he had meticulously examined the locket found with Holly. The crest etched into the aged gold belonged to the Blackwood family, a detail that made his stomach churn with memories he'd rather keep buried. The doorbell's chime interrupted his thoughts. Ever efficient, Mrs. Davis was already on her way down to greet the visitor. Sarah Thompson was not what Henry expected. The social worker had sharp green eyes and a presence that combined professionalism with kindness. Her slight accent hinted at years spent studying in Europe, but she retained a distinct New York charm. "Mr. Lawrence Seward, she began, settling into the plush armchair in his study. I need to understand the precise circumstances in which the child was found. As Henry recounted the events of the previous night, Sarah took meticulous notes. Her eyes narrowed when he mentioned the silk blanket and widened slightly at the mention of the locket. May I see it? She asked. Henry hesitated. Something inside him wanted to protect that secret, but he knew he had no choice. He retrieved the locket from his pocket and handed it over. Sarah examined the object with a professional eye. This crest, it belongs to an old family, doesn't it? The Blackwoods, Henry replied, his voice betraying an emotion he couldn't quite conceal. At that moment, Holly's cry echoed through the intercom system Mrs. Davis had installed. Henry rose instantly, his body responding to an instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Allow me to accompany you, Sarah said, her professional tone softening. In the nursery, they found Mrs. Davis already soothing Holly. The scene that followed captivated Sarah's attention. Henry, the powerful CEO, awkwardly but tenderly holding the baby, his blue eyes meeting Holly's identical gaze. Remarkable, Sarah murmured, observing the striking resemblance. I'm sorry? Henry asked, distracted by Holly, who was now gripping his finger tightly. The connection, Sarah replied diplomatically. It's rare to see such an immediate bond. From her corner, Mrs. Davis watched the scene with an expression that mixed satisfaction and concern. Mr. Lawrence, Sarah continued, normally, in cases like this, the child would be placed in a suitable facility while we investigate her origins. Henry's body visibly stiffened. Memories of St. Joseph's flooded his mind. The cold, the loneliness, the abandonment. No. His voice was firmer than he intended. She stays. Sarah studied his face for a moment. This will require a complex legal process, evaluations, regular visits, documentation. I'll do whatever it takes, Henry interrupted, surprising himself with the intensity of his resolve. A small smile played on Sarah's lips. Well, then we'll need to begin the temporary guardianship procedures immediately. As Sarah explained the next steps, Henry barely listened. His attention was completely captured by Holly, now sleeping peacefully in his arms. How could a child found less than 24 hours ago feel so... right? There's one more thing, Sarah said, retrieving the locket from her briefcase. This piece could be crucial in identifying the child's family. I need to take it for analysis. Again, that inexplicable resistance rose within Henry. Is it necessary? Absolutely, Sarah replied with professional firmness, but her eyes held a hint of understanding. Reluctantly, Henry nodded. As Sarah put the locket away, Mrs. Davis approached with a bottle. You need to rest, Mr. Lawrence, she said softly. I'll take care of little Holly now. Holly? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. The name, Henry began, realizing he had chosen it without thinking. It just seemed to fit. Sarah made a final note in her file. I'll return tomorrow with the necessary documents. And Mr. Lawrence, she paused at the door. Merry Christmas. After her departure, Henry remained in the nursery, watching Holly sleep. The late afternoon light painted golden shadows on the walls, and outside Manhattan continued its dance of snow and light. Sir, Mrs. Davis spoke softly. There's something in her eyes. Her eyes are identical to mine, Henry finished, his voice low. Yes, Mrs. Davis replied, her voice heavy with a meaning Henry didn't grasp. Just like your mother's. Henry turned sharply, but Mrs. Davis had already left the room, leaving him with more questions than answers. How did his housekeeper know about his mother's eyes? And why did Holly, a stranger, seem to awaken such deep memories and emotions? The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Manhattan's secrets in white, while inside the Lawrence penthouse, the mystery was only just beginning to unfold. Christmas morning sunlight streamed through the silk drapes of the makeshift nursery, where Holly slept peacefully in the antique crib Mrs. Davis had surprisingly found in the storage room. Henry, still dressed from the night before, watched the infant's every move, mesmerized by her presence. Mr. Lawrence, Mrs. Davis entered quietly, carrying a tray laden with coffee and bagels. The social worker will arrive in an hour. Henry nodded, his eyes fixed on the crib. In the quiet hours of the morning, amidst bottle feedings and diaper changes, he'd carefully examined the locket found with Holly. The crest engraved on the tarnished gold belonged to the Blackwood family, a detail that stirred unsettling memories he'd rather leave undisturbed. The sound of the doorbell sliced through his thoughts. Mrs. Davis, always efficient, was already descending the stairs to greet their visitor. Sarah Thompson was different than Henry had pictured. The social worker possessed keen green eyes and a demeanor that balanced professionalism with genuine warmth. A trace of an accent hinted at time spent abroad, but she exuded a quintessential New York energy. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, taking a seat in the plush leather armchair in his study, "I need to understand the exact circumstances surrounding the discovery of the child." As Henry detailed the events of Christmas Eve, Sarah meticulously documented every word. Her eyes narrowed at the mention of the silk blanket, then widened slightly when he spoke of the locket. "Might I see it?" she inquired. Henry hesitated. A part of him wished to keep the locket's secret close, but he understood he had no choice. He retrieved it from his pocket and placed it in her hand. Sarah examined the piece with a practiced eye. "This crest, it belongs to a family of some standing, doesn't it?" "The Blackwoods," Henry confirmed, his voice revealing an emotion he couldn't mask. Just then, Holly's cries echoed from the baby monitor Mrs. Davis had thoughtfully installed. Henry was on his feet instantly, propelled by a paternal instinct he hadn't realized he possessed. "Permit me to join you," Sarah offered, her professional facade softening. In the nursery, they found Mrs. Davis already comforting Holly. The ensuing scene held Sarah's attention captive. Henry, the formidable CEO, holding the baby with an awkward tenderness, his blue eyes mirroring Holly's. "Extraordinary," Sarah murmured, taking in the striking resemblance. "Excuse me," Henry asked, his attention focused on Holly, who now clung to his finger with surprising strength. "The connection," Sarah clarified diplomatically. "It's uncommon to witness such an immediate bond." From her vantage point, Mrs. Davis observed the interaction with an expression of mingled satisfaction and apprehension. "Mr. Lawrence," Sarah resumed, "typically in situations like this, the child is placed in an appropriate care facility while we conduct an investigation into her background." Henry stiffened, his mind flashing back to the starkness of St. Joseph's orphanage, the chilling loneliness, the pervasive sense of abandonment. "No," he declared, his voice more resolute than he'd intended. "She stays." Sarah studied him intently. "That will necessitate a complicated legal process, evaluations, home visits, extensive documentation." "I'll do whatever's required," Henry asserted, the strength of his conviction surprising even himself. A faint smile graced Sarah's lips. "Very well. Then we'll need to commence the temporary guardianship proceedings without delay." While Sarah outlined the necessary steps, Henry struggled to focus. His attention remained fixed on Holly, sleeping peacefully in his arms. How could a child, found less than a day ago, feel so intrinsically right? "One more detail," Sarah added, retrieving the locket from her briefcase. "This item could prove essential in establishing the child's identity. I'll need to take it for analysis." That inexplicable resistance stirred in Henry again. "Is that truly necessary?" "Absolutely vital," Sarah affirmed, her tone professional yet understanding. With a reluctant nod, Henry acquiesced. As Sarah secured the locket, Mrs. Davis approached with a warmed bottle. "You should rest, Mr. Lawrence," she suggested gently. "I'll attend to little Holly." "Holly?" Sarah questioned, her brow furrowing slightly. "The name—" Henry began, realizing he'd chosen it instinctively. It simply felt appropriate. Sarah made a final notation in her file. "I'll return tomorrow with the required paperwork. And Mr. Lawrence," she paused at the doorway, "Merry Christmas." After Sarah's departure, Henry lingered in the nursery, watching Holly sleep. The waning afternoon sun cast long shadows across the walls, and outside, the city continued its wintry rhythm of snow and artificial light. "Sir, Mrs. Davis spoke softly. "There's something about her eyes. They're the same as mine." Henry finished, his voice hushed. Indeed, Mrs. Davis agreed, her tone laden with a significance Henry couldn't decipher, precisely like your mother's. Henry spun around, but Mrs. Davis had already slipped from the room, leaving him with a growing unease and more questions than answers. How could his housekeeper know about his mother's eyes? And why did this child, a complete stranger, evoke such profound emotions and buried memories? The snow continued to fall, veiling the city's secrets in a pristine white blanket, while within the Lawrence penthouse, the mystery surrounding Holly was just beginning to unravel. Henry's office was bathed in the dim light of the late winter afternoon. A week had passed since Holly's arrival, and the Lawrence penthouse now pulsed with a newfound energy. Henry watched the snow falling outside, lost in thought, when Sarah Thompson entered, carrying a thick file. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, taking a seat, "we have some developments regarding Holly." Henry straightened, his attention immediately captured. "Please, tell me." Sarah hesitated, a rare occurrence for her. "Before I do, I need to ask you some personal questions. Does the name Melissa Blackwood mean anything to you?" The world seemed to freeze. Henry felt the air leave his lungs. Melissa, a name he hadn't heard in 8 years, yet it still held the power to unsettle him. "Yes," he replied, his voice hoarse. "We were involved. A long time ago. When was the last time you saw her?" Henry closed his eyes, painful memories surfacing. 8 years ago. She left without explanation, leaving only a letter. Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Lawrence, the locket found with Holly belongs to the Blackwood family, and Melissa recently returned to the United States." Henry's heart pounded in his chest. Melissa, back, and the connection with Holly. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice softening. "Melissa is in New York for treatment. She has a serious heart condition." The revelation hit Henry like a physical blow. The anger he had harbored for years began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of concern. At that moment, Holly's cries echoed through the intercom. Henry instinctively rose, but Mrs. Davis was already there, soothing the baby. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Lawrence, given the circumstances and the striking physical resemblance between you and Holly, we need to consider the possibility that she is your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Henry walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered city. "How is that possible?" he murmured. "Melissa never told me." Sarah approached him. "Sometimes people make difficult decisions for reasons we don't immediately understand." Henry turned, his blue eyes, Holly's eyes, shimmering with emotion. "I need to see her. Melissa." "I imagined you would," Sarah replied, handing him a card. "This is the hospital address, but be prepared. 8 years is a long time, and her situation is delicate." Just then, Mrs. Davis entered, carrying Holly. The baby immediately reached for Henry, who instinctively took her in his arms. "Sir," Mrs. Davis spoke softly, "I thought you might like to see the little one." Henry looked at the baby, at those familiar eyes, and felt a surge of love that surprised him. "Mrs. Davis," he began, his voice trembling, "did you know about Melissa, about Holly?" The housekeeper hesitated. "Sir, there's much I need to tell you, but perhaps it's best after your visit to the hospital." Sarah watched the scene with compassion. "Mr. Lawrence, I know this is a lot to take in. But remember, Holly needs stability now." Henry nodded, kissing the baby's forehead. "She'll have it. No matter what happens, she'll have a home here." As Sarah departed, Mrs. Davis lingered, her gaze heavy with secrets. "Sir," she spoke softly, "when you see Miss Melissa, remember that the heart sometimes makes decisions the mind doesn't understand." Henry stared at her, realizing for the first time how much she seemed to know. "Mrs. Davis, what aren't you telling me?" The housekeeper smiled sadly. "All in good time, sir. Now, focus on Melissa and Holly. The past has a way of revealing itself when it's meant to." As night fell, Henry found himself on the precipice of an emotional abyss. Holly slept in his arms, oblivious to the turmoil her arrival had unleashed. And somewhere in the city, Melissa waited with answers, with secrets, with a past that threatened to rewrite everything. The following morning, Henry prepared to go to the hospital. His reflection in the mirror showed a man transformed by the past week. The eyes staring back at him were Holly's eyes, a constant reminder of the mystery he needed to unravel. Mrs. Davis appeared at his bedroom door, holding an old box. "Sir, before you go, perhaps you should see this." Inside the box, Henry found old photographs, himself, young and in love, alongside Melissa. His fingers trembled as he touched one particular photo. Melissa, radiant, with a hand resting gently on her slightly swollen belly. "You kept this all this time?" he asked, and his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Davis nodded. "I promised Miss Melissa. She said you'd understand one day." Henry felt the weight of 8 years of absence, of unanswered questions. Carefully, he placed the photo in his inside coat pocket, close to his heart. As he left the penthouse, snow was falling softly. Manhattan seemed different now, as if the city itself held secrets waiting to be revealed. In the back of the car, Henry looked at the hospital address one more time. The driver started the engine, and the Lawrence penthouse receded into the distance. Ahead, a hospital awaited, and with it, answers that could change everything. The snow continued to fall, obscuring the tracks of the past and present, as Henry headed towards a meeting that could redefine his future, and Holly's. Mount Sinai Hospital loomed large against the grey Manhattan sky. Henry Lawrence, his heart pounding, walked through the automatic doors, the photograph of Melissa heavy in his pocket like a secret about to be revealed. At the reception desk, a middle-aged nurse looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and professional detachment. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Melissa Blackwood," Henry replied, his voice betraying a mix of anxiety and anticipation. After a few clicks on the computer, the nurse nodded. "Room 412, 4th floor. But sir, only for 15 minutes. The patient needs her rest." The elevator seemed to move in slow motion. Henry watched the numbers ascend, each floor bringing him closer to a confrontation he both craved and dreaded. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, he hesitated for a moment before stepping out. The number on the door seemed to pulsate. Henry took a deep breath, knocked softly, and entered. The room was bathed in the soft light of the winter afternoon, and there, sitting by the window, was Melissa. 8 years had passed, but Henry would recognize her anywhere. Her auburn hair, once long and flowing, was now cut short, framing a face paler and thinner than he remembered. But her eyes, those eyes he now saw in Holly, still shone with the same intensity. "Henry," she whispered, her voice a mixture of surprise and carefully controlled emotion. He took a step forward, 1,000 questions clamoring in his throat. But seeing Melissa, fragile yet so familiar, all he could manage was, "Why?" Melissa looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted to tell you. Every day for the past 8 years, I wanted to tell you." Henry approached him, sitting in the chair beside her. "Tell me now, Melissa, please." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. But my family, they didn't approve of our relationship. They threatened to cut all ties, to leave me with nothing. I would have taken care of you, of us," Henry interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. Melissa smiled sadly. "I know, but then I found out about my heart condition. The doctors said the pregnancy was high risk, that I might not survive. My family used that against me, saying I'd be condemning my child to a life without a mother." Henry closed his eyes, the pain of the revelation washing over him. "So you left?" "Yes," Melissa whispered. "I went to London. I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy with your eyes, Tom." Henry's world seemed to tilt on its axis. "A son." He had a son. "Where is he now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "With my sister in London. Henry, I came to New York for the treatment, but also to find you, to tell you everything." Henry stared at her, a sudden realization dawning on him. "And Holly?" Melissa frowned, confused. "Holly?" "The baby, Melissa. The baby left on my doorstep on Christmas Eve." Melissa's eyes widened in shock. "Henry, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't leave any baby on your doorstep." The silence that followed was deafening. If Melissa hadn't left Holly, then who had, and why? Before they could continue, A nurse entered the room. "Excuse me, sir, but your time is up." "Ms. Blackwood needs to rest." Henry stood, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. Melissa reached for his hand. "Please, come back tomorrow. We have so much more to talk about." He nodded, unable to form words. As he walked down the hospital corridor, Henry felt as if the floor was moving beneath his feet. A son in London, Melissa back in his life, and Holly, still a mystery. Arriving back at his penthouse, he found Sarah and Mrs. Davis in the living room, Holly sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby. "How did it go?" Sarah asked gently, noticing Henry's distraught expression. He sat heavily, running his hands over his face. "Melissa is back. We have a son, Tom, in London. But she doesn't know anything about Holly." Mrs. Davis paled visibly, exchanging a quick glance with Sarah. "Sir," the housekeeper began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. About Holly, about the night she arrived." Henry stared at her, sensing he was about to uncover another secret. "What do you know, Mrs. Davis?" The housekeeper took a deep breath, tears welling in her eyes. "The locket that was with Holly, it was mine. I put it there." The silence that followed was broken only by Holly's soft snores. Henry, Sarah, and Mrs. Davis looked at each other, knowing they were on the verge of a revelation that would change everything. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Manhattan, blanketing the city's secrets in white, while inside the Lawrence penthouse, the past and present intertwined in a complex web of love, sacrifice, and redemption. Henry entered the hospital room, his heart pounding against his ribs. Melissa sat in bed, looking stronger than the day before, but her eyes held a weight Henry couldn't decipher. "You came back," Melissa said softly, a faint smile playing on her lips. Henry nodded, settling into the chair beside her bed. "We have a lot to talk about, Melissa." She inhaled deeply, as if gathering courage. "Yes, we do. Henry, about Holly." "What about her?" Henry asked, his voice betraying a mixture of anxiety and protectiveness. Melissa closed her eyes for a moment. "Holly isn't my daughter, Henry. I don't know who she is or where she came from." The revelation hit Henry like a punch to the gut. If Holly wasn't Melissa's daughter, then who? But before he could fully process this information, Melissa continued, "But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Henry leaned forward, sensing he was on the precipice of another life-altering revelation. "We have a son, Henry, a boy. He's 7 years old now." The world seemed to stop. Henry felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. A son. He had a son. How is that possible?" he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Melissa began to cry silently. "When I left 8 years ago, I was pregnant. I wanted to tell you, Henry, more than anything, but my family, they forced me to leave." Henry stood abruptly, walking to the window. His mind was reeling. A son, a 7-year-old boy he had never met, who had grown up without knowing who his father was. "Why, Melissa, why didn't you contact me? I would have done anything." Melissa wiped away her tears. "My parents threatened to cut off all financial support. They said they would ruin your career, that you would never build the empire you dreamed of. And then, when I found out about my heart condition, they used it against me. They said I might die in childbirth, that our son would be left an orphan." Henry turned, facing Melissa with a mixture of pain and anger. "So you just decided for both of us? Decided that I didn't deserve to know I had a son? I was weak, Henry. I was scared and confused. They sent me to London, forced me to marry a man I barely knew, to give the baby a respectable name." Henry felt his legs weaken, and he leaned against the wall for support. "You got married?" Melissa nodded sadly. "Yes, to an English businessman. Her marriage arranged by my family. But it was never real, Henry. He knew from the start that the child wasn't his. The marriage ended 2 years ago." A heavy silence hung over the room. Henry struggled to process everything he was hearing. A son, a forced marriage, years of lies and secrets. "What's he like?" Henry finally asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Our son? A genuine smile lit up Melissa's face for the first time. "He's wonderful, Henry. Intelligent, curious, with a huge heart. He has your eyes, you know, and your passion for building things. He's always making projects with Lego blocks, dreaming of skyscrapers and bridges." Henry felt tears prick his eyes. A boy who had inherited not only his features, but also his passions. What's his name?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Tom," Melissa replied softly. "Thomas Henry Blackwood." Henry felt his heart clench. She had given him his name, even if secretly. "Does he know about me?" Melissa nodded. "He knows he has a father in America, a father who builds big and important things. He's always wanted to meet you, Henry." Henry walked back to the chair, sitting heavily. His mind was filled with images of a little boy he had never met, of lost years, of first steps and words he had never witnessed. "I want to meet him, Melissa. I need to meet him." Melissa took Henry's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know. And he wants to meet you, too. That's why I came to New York, Henry. Not just for the treatment, but to try and fix the mistakes of the past, to give Tom a chance to know his real father." Henry looked at their intertwined hands, feeling the weight of 8 years of secrets and regrets. "What now? What do we do now?" "Now," Melissa said, her voice gaining strength. "We try to mend what was broken. We give Tom the family he always should have had. And as for Holly, Henry, I don't know who she is or why she was left with you, but if you love her, if you consider her your daughter, then she's part of this family too." Henry nodded, feeling a confused mix of emotions: anger for the lost time, joy at knowing he had a son, fear of the uncertain future, and an overwhelming love for 2 children, one he had never met, and another who had entered his life just days ago. "We have a lot to figure out, Melissa, a lot to fix." "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand, "but we can do it together, can't we? For Tom and Holly?" Henry looked into Melissa's eyes, the same eyes that had captivated him so many years ago, the same eyes he now saw in Holly and Hugh he imagined in Tom as well. "Yes," he said finally. "Together." As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting a golden glow through the hospital window, Henry and Melissa began to plan a future they had never imagined, a future that included a long-lost son, an unexpected daughter, and the chance to heal old wounds and create a family that transcended blood and circumstance. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in a white veil of possibilities, while inside that hospital room, 2 hearts began to tread the path of forgiveness and reconciliation. Dawn broke over Manhattan with a dazzling clarity, the snow reflecting the winter sun. Henry had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and anticipation. Today was the day. Today he would meet Tom, his son. In the Lawrence penthouse, Henry paced back and forth, nervously adjusting his tie for the 10th time. Mrs. Davis watched him with a mixture of concern and tenderness. "Sir," she spoke softly, "everything will be all right. The boy already loves you, even without knowing you." Henry stopped, looking at his loyal housekeeper with watery eyes. "What if he hates me, Mrs. Davis? What if he doesn't forgive me for not being there all these years?" Mrs. Davis approached him, gently straightening his tie. "Children have an incredible capacity for love, sir. Give it time." A soft cry from the next room reminded Henry of Holly. He went to the crib, picking up the little girl in his arms. "And what about you, my little one? How will you feel about having a big brother?" Holly just smiled, gripping Henry's finger with her tiny hand. In that moment, Henry felt a surge of love and determination. He would make this work. For Tom, for Holly, for this strange and wonderful family that was forming. The sound of a car pulling up made Henry's heart leap. They had arrived. With Holly in his arms, he descended the stairs, each step feeling like an eternity. The front door opened, and Melissa entered, still pale from her hospital stay, but with a determined glint in her eyes. And behind her, Tom. The boy was the image of Henry as a child. The same deep blue eyes, the same unruly brown hair. He looked around curiously, his eyes finally landing on Henry. For a moment, no one moved. Time seemed to freeze. Then, Tom took a small step forward. "Are you my dad?" he asked, his voice small but firm. Henry felt the tears he had been holding back finally fall. "Yes, Tom, I am your father." Tom looked at Holly, then back at Henry. "And is she my sister?" Henry knelt down, bringing himself to Tom's level, still holding Holly. "Yes, this is Holly, your little sister." Tom approached cautiously, studying Holly's face. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "She has our eyes, Dad." The use of the word Dad made Henry's heart soar. He extended his free arm, pulling Tom into a hug. For a moment, they stood like that, father and son united for the first time. Melissa watched the scene, silent tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Davis discreetly offered a handkerchief, which she accepted with a grateful smile. When they finally separated, Henry noticed something in Tom's hand. "Oh, what do you have there, son?" Tom smiled shyly, revealing a small skyscraper model made of Lego blocks. "I made this. Mum said you build real buildings." Henry felt his heart swell even more. "You like building things?" Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I want to be a great builder like you when I grow up." "Mom always told me stories about the amazing buildings you make." Henry looked at Melissa, gratitude in his eyes. Even when they were apart, she had kept his memory alive for Tom. "How about you show me some of your designs?" Henry suggested. "I have a room full of blueprints and models I think you'll love." Tom's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I?" Henry laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. "Of course you can. Let's go." As they climbed the stairs, Henry couldn't help but notice how Tom tilted his head the same way he did when he was thinking, how he gestured with his hands when talking about his building projects. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. In the design room, Tom was in awe. His eyes darted over the models and blueprints, absorbing every detail. Henry watched, fascinated, as the boy asked intelligent and insightful questions about each project. "Dad," Tom asked suddenly, "do you think we could build something together someday?" Henry felt his heart clench with emotion. "I would love that, Tom. In fact, how about we start now? I have some special building blocks I use for prototypes. We could create something together." Tom's smile lit up the entire room. Father and son sat down on the floor, with Holly watching curiously from her nearby playpen. As they built, Henry told stories about his projects, and Tom shared his ambitious ideas for future skyscrapers. Melissa watched them from the doorway, her heart overflowing with joy and a tinge of sadness for the lost years. Mrs. Davis joined her, offering a cup of tea. "They seem to have been made for each other, don't they?" Mrs. Davis commented softly. Melissa nodded, wiping away a tear. "Yes, they do, thank you, Mrs. Davis, for taking care of him all these years." The two women stood there, witnessing the birth of a bond that, though belated, promised to be unbreakable. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, painting the Manhattan skyline in hues of orange and pink, Henry and Tom were still engrossed in their joint project. Holly had fallen asleep, and Melissa gently carried her to her room. "Dad," Tom said, his voice sleepy but happy, "this was the best day of my life." Henry felt his heart swell in a way he hadn't known was possible. He pulled Tom close, kissing the top of his head. "Mine too, son." "Mine too." That night, as Tom slept in a room prepared especially for him, Henry lay awake, replaying every moment of the day. The fear and anxiety had given way to a profound joy and a fierce determination. He had lost 7 years, but he was determined to make up for every second. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly on Manhattan, blanketing the city in a white veil of new beginnings. And inside the Lawrence penthouse, a family that was once fragmented began to heal, united by love and the promise of a future built together, brick by brick, dream by dream. The Lawrence penthouse was quiet that night. Tom and Holly slept soundly, exhausted after a day filled with emotions and discoveries. Henry was in his study, trying to process the surprising events of the past few days, when a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, immediately recognizing the familiar touch. Mrs. Davis entered, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. But there was something different in her demeanor tonight, a mixture of determination and apprehension that Henry rarely saw in his always composed housekeeper. Mr. Lawrence, she began, placing the tray on the table. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago. Henry gestured for her to sit, sensing he was about to hear yet another revelation that would change his life. Mrs. Davis took a deep breath before beginning. Before I worked for you, sir, I was the head housekeeper for the Blackwood family. Henry felt his heart quicken. You knew Melissa since she was a child? Mrs. Davis nodded. Yes, I watched Miss Melissa grow up. And I was there when she fell in love with you, when she became pregnant, and when her family forced her to leave. Henry's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. You knew all this time? Yes, sir, Mrs. Davis replied, her voice heavy with emotion. I helped Melissa during her secret pregnancy. I was the one who helped her escape to London, against her family's wishes. Henry stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His mind reeled with this new information. Why, Mrs. Davis, why didn't you ever tell me? Mrs. Davis lowered her eyes. At first, it was out of loyalty to Melissa. She made me promise to keep her secret. But then I saw how much you were suffering, how much you needed someone to care for you. She paused, gathering the courage to continue. That's why I came to work for you, sir. Melissa asked me to look after you, to make sure you were all right. But over time, my affection for you became genuine. You became like a son to me. Henry turned, looking at the woman who had been a constant presence in his life for so many years. And Tom, you knew about him all this time? Mrs. Davis nodded sadly. Yes. Melissa sent me pictures and updates regularly. I tried to subtly keep you connected to him, even though you didn't know. How? Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. The stories I told about families, about fathers and sons. The small gifts I suggested you donate to orphanages on Tom's birthday. Even the decoration of the guest room that is now his. I prepared it thinking of him, hoping that one day... Henry felt tears welling in his eyes. All this time, Mrs. Davis had been silently paving the way for this moment. And the locket? He asked suddenly, remembering the object that had started this whole journey. Mrs. Davis smiled sadly. Ah, the locket. It's a Blackwood family heirloom, passed down through generations. Melissa left it with me before she left, saying it would one day belong to her son. When Holly arrived, I knew it was time to bring it to light. But Holly isn't Melissa's daughter, Henry pointed out, confused. No, she's not, Mrs. Davis agreed. But I knew the locket would lead you back to Melissa, back to Tom. It was time to reunite this family. Henry sat down heavily, overwhelmed by all these revelations. Mrs. Davis, I don't know what to say. The housekeeper stood up, approaching him. You don't need to say anything, sir. I only ask for your forgiveness for keeping these secrets for so long. Everything I did was out of love. Love for Melissa, for Tom, for you, and now for Holly. Henry looked at the woman who had been so much more than just a housekeeper, who had been, in many ways, the mother he never had. There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Davis, he said finally, taking her hands in his. You kept this family together, even when we were apart. You took care of all of us. Mrs. Davis smiled, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. You are my family, sir, all of you. At that moment, a soft cry echoed from the baby monitor. Holly was awake. Go, Mrs. Davis said gently. Your daughter needs you. Henry stood, but before leaving, he pulled Mrs. Davis into a tight hug. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. As Henry climbed the stairs to attend to Holly, he felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The secrets had been revealed, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. In Holly's room, he picked her up, rocking her gently. From across the hall, he could hear Tom's soft snores, his children, his family. Henry looked out the window at the snow-covered city. The future was still uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, but now he knew he wasn't alone. He had Melissa, Tom, Holly, and Mrs. Davis, the silent guardian who had kept the threads of their lives intertwined through the years. With Holly nestled in his arms, Henry made a silent promise. He would honor Mrs. Davis's sacrifices, Melissa's love, Tom's resilience and Holly's innocence. Together, they would build something more enduring than any skyscraper. A family. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly on Manhattan, blanketing the city in a white veil of new beginnings. Autumn arrived in New York, painting the trees in Central Park with hues of gold and crimson. Inside the Dubois townhouse, the changing seasons mirrored the transformations within. Henry Dubois sat in his study, gazing out the window as he swirled a glass of brandy. His thoughts drifted to Melissa, his wife, resting upstairs. Her illness had progressed, but in a strange way, it had brought a new warmth to the once somber house. A soft knock on the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he said, turning to see Sarah, the housekeeper, enter with a tray of tea. "I thought you might enjoy some tea, Mr. Dubois," she said, placing the tray on the table. Henry nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Sarah. Please, sit for a moment." Sarah hesitated briefly before taking the chair opposite his desk. Henry observed her, realizing how much she had become a constant, comforting presence in recent months. "How is Melissa today?" he asked, his voice betraying a concern he once would have masked. Sarah smiled gently. She had a good morning. Holly was reading to her, and it seemed to lift her spirits. Henry felt a pang of guilt. "Holly has been a blessing. I should spend more time with Melissa." "You have been spending more time with her, sir," Sarah reassured him. "Melissa notices and appreciates it. Things are changing, and that takes time." Henry nodded slowly. "You're right, as always, Sarah. Sometimes I wonder how we managed before you arrived." Sarah blushed slightly at the compliment. "We are all learning and growing together, sir. It's a process." Upstairs, Holly gently closed the book she had been reading to Melissa. The afternoon light streamed through the open windows, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. "Thank you, dear," Melissa said with a weak smile. "Your reading always soothes me." Holly took Melissa's hand. "It's my pleasure, Mom." "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner." Melissa squeezed her stepdaughter's hand. "The past is the past, Holly. What matters is now, and I'm glad we have this chance to get to know each other better." Tears glistened in Holly's eyes. "Me too, Mom. Me too." The door opened, and Tom entered quietly. He smiled at the sight of Holly and Melissa holding hands. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Never," Melissa replied. "Come, join us." Tom approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. Holly watched him, noticing how much more relaxed and open her brother seemed. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" Tom asked gently. Melissa smiled. "Better, with both my children here with me." Holly and Tom exchanged glances. There was a silent understanding between them, a bond that was strengthening with each passing day. "Tom," Holly began hesitantly, "I was thinking maybe we could go for a walk together this afternoon. There's a new coffee shop that opened near Central Park I'd like to try." Tom seemed surprised for a moment, then a genuine smile lit up his face. "I'd love to, Holly. It would be nice to spend some time together." Melissa watched their interaction with shining eyes. "Go on, you two. Enjoy the afternoon. Mrs. Davis will be here soon to keep me company." As Holly and Tom left the room, Melissa closed her eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude. Her illness, as difficult as it was, had brought her family closer. In the townhouse garden, Mrs. Davis strolled slowly, her arm linked with Henry's. The sound of dry leaves crunching under their feet filled the air. "You've done a good job with the children, Henry," Mrs. Davis said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "They're getting closer," Henry sighed. "I can't take credit for that, Mrs. Davis. It was Melissa and Sarah. They've been the glue holding this family together." Mrs. Davis smiled wisely. "Perhaps, but you've changed too, my friend. You're more open, more present. That makes all the difference." They stopped near a stone bench, and Henry helped Mrs. Davis sit down. "I've made so many mistakes, Mrs. Davis," Henry admitted, his voice low. "So many lost years." "The important thing is that you recognize that now," Mrs. Davis replied, patting his hand. "Forgiveness is a process, Henry. It starts with forgiving yourself." Henry nodded slowly. "Melissa has been so strong, so gracious. I don't deserve her forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Henry," Mrs. Davis said gently. It's about healing, about moving forward. Melissa understands that. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sarah was preparing dinner when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Henry standing in the doorway. "Mr. Dubois," she said, surprised. "Is there something I can help you with?" Henry stepped into the kitchen, looking slightly out of place. "Actually, Sarah, I was wondering if I could help you." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "Help me, sir?" Henry smiled shyly. "Yes. Well, I realized I've never really learned to cook. I thought it might be useful, and perhaps surprise Melissa with something I made myself." Sarah's face lit up with a warm smile. "That would be wonderful, sir. Melissa will be delighted. Why don't we start with something simple? How about a soup?" As Henry and Sarah worked side by side in the kitchen, occasional laughter echoed through the halls of the townhouse. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in those old walls for a long time. That evening, the Dubois family gathered for dinner. Melissa, feeling a bit stronger, joined them in the dining room. The atmosphere was different than it used to be, lighter, warmer. Holly and Tom shared stories of their afternoon together, their eyes sparkling with a newfound sibling camaraderie. Melissa watched with a soft smile, her heart warming at the sight of her children finally connecting. When the soup was served, Henry cleared his throat nervously. "Melissa, I made this for you, with Sarah's help, of course." Melissa looked at the steaming bowl of soup, then at her husband, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Henry, it's probably not very good." Henry began to apologize, but Melissa interrupted him. "It's perfect," she said, tasting a spoonful, "because you made it with love." Silence fell over the table, but it wasn't the tense silence of the past. It was a comfortable silence, filled with unspoken understanding and forgiveness. Later that night, after everyone had retired to their rooms, Henry found Melissa in their bedroom. She was sitting by the window, gazing at the city lights. "Melissa," he said softly, approaching her. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Henry." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything. For the years I wasted, for the pain I caused." Melissa caressed his face gently. "I know, my love. I'm sorry too. We both made mistakes." Henry pressed a kiss to her hand. Do you think we can start over?" Melissa smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face. "We already have, Henry. Every day is a new beginning." As Henry embraced Melissa, they both felt the walls they had built over the years begin to crumble. Healing was happening, not just for Melissa, but for the entire Dubois family. Outside the door, Sarah smiled to herself as she passed by. The Dubois townhouse was changing. Its inhabitants were growing, learning to love and forgive, and in the midst of it all, hearts were mending, finding new strength in togetherness and rediscovered family love. Spring arrived in New York, bringing with it a burst of color and life. In the heart of Central Park, preparations were underway for a very special event, the wedding of Henry Dubois and Sarah Walker. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and a sense of joyful anticipation hung over the scene. "So, my love," Henry smiled, turning to Sarah, "have you given any more thought to a date?" Sarah tilted her head thoughtfully. "I was thinking late May. The park will be in full bloom, and the weather should be perfect for an outdoor ceremony." Henry nodded, his eyes shining with happiness. "Late May sounds wonderful. Imagine, with all the cherry blossoms." The couple spent the next few hours discussing wedding details, from the menu to the guest list. Sarah wanted something intimate, with just close friends and family, while Henry leaned towards a larger celebration. They eventually compromised on an elegant yet understated affair. "The most important thing is that we'll be together," Sarah said, kissing Henry's cheek softly. "Everything else is secondary." Meanwhile, a few miles away, Tom was in his New York apartment, packing for another trip to London. Since taking on the role of director of the London branch of Dubois Enterprises, his life had become a constant commute between the two cities. Looking out the window, Tom reflected on how much his life had changed in recent months. The responsibility of leading the company's international expansion was both exhilarating and challenging. He missed New York, his family, but he was also thriving in the vibrant energy of London, His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Melissa. "Tom, I have some news." Melissa's voice sounded excited. "Melissa, how are you? Tell me everything," Tom replied, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "I started the new treatment yesterday," Melissa explained. "The doctors are optimistic. It's experimental, but the preliminary results are promising." Tom felt a knot in his throat loosen. Melissa's battle with cancer had been long and arduous, but she had never lost hope. "That's wonderful, Melissa. I'll be back in New York at the end of the week. We can celebrate then." "Absolutely. I can't wait to see you," Melissa replied, the joy evident in her voice. Hanging up the phone, Tom finished packing with a smile on his face. Life was finally taking a positive turn for all of them. Back at the Dubois townhouse, Holly was in her element. Since taking on the role of family matriarch, she had dedicated herself to bringing everyone closer, transforming the house into a true home. That afternoon, she was organizing a family lunch. The dining room table was set with care, fresh flowers adorned the centerpiece, and the delicious aroma of cooking filled the air. "Aunt Holly, do you need any help?" Sarah asked, entering the dining room. Holly smiled warmly at her soon-to-be sister-in-law. "Oh, Sarah, it's so good to see you. Could you help me arrange these napkins?" As they worked together, Holly observed Sarah thoughtfully. "You look radiant today. Are the wedding preparations going well?" Sarah nodded, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "Yes, Henry and I have finally agreed on almost everything. We still have a few details to iron out, but we're on the right track." Holly patted Sarah's shoulder gently. "I'm so happy for you, dear. You've brought so much light into this family, into Henry's life." Holly's words made Sarah smile, remembering how much her life had changed since she met Henry. From a young artist struggling to make a name for herself in New York, she was now part of a loving family and about to marry the man she loved. Lunch was a success. Henry, Sarah, Holly, and Melissa, who had been given a brief reprieve from her treatment, gathered around the table, sharing laughter and stories. Tom's absence was felt, but everyone understood the importance of his work in London. "I have an idea," Holly announced after dessert. "Why don't we have Christmas here this year? We can invite Tom, of course, and turn the house into a real winter wonderland." The suggestion was met with general enthusiasm. Melissa, in particular, seemed thrilled with the idea. "That would be wonderful. It's been so long since we celebrated Christmas as a family." In the following weeks, the Dubois townhouse underwent a gradual transformation. Holly spearheaded the decorating efforts, with enthusiastic help from Sarah and occasional assistance from Henry. The old unheavy curtains were replaced with lighter, more cheerful fabrics. The furniture was rearranged to create more welcoming and inviting spaces. Sarah, with her artistic eye, suggested a new color palette that brought life and warmth to every room. The room that had once belonged to Henry's parents, and which had remained closed for years, was finally opened and renovated. With sensitivity, Holly and Henry decided to turn it into a family library, preserving some cherished mementos while also creating a new space for future memories. As December approached, the transformation of the townhouse accelerated. A magnificent Christmas tree was erected in the entrance hall, decorated with ornaments that blended family tradition with modern touches chosen by Sarah. Tom, on one of his weekend visits, brought a collection of rare books from London for the new library, contributing to the room's sophisticated yet cozy atmosphere. Melissa, in between treatments, dedicated herself to planning the Christmas Eve dinner menu, determined to create an unforgettable meal for her family. Christmas Eve finally arrived, bringing with it a light snowfall that dusted New York City in white. The Dubois townhouse, brightly lit and festively decorated, looked like something out of a fairy tale. Tom arrived first, laden with gifts and stories from London. Melissa followed, her face flushed with health and excitement. Henry and Sarah greeted everyone with warm hugs, while Holly oversaw the final preparations in the kitchen. When everyone gathered in the living room around the crackling fireplace, Henry raised his glass in a toast. "To our family," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the love that binds us together." "To family," everyone echoed, their glasses clinking softly. At that moment, Looking at the smiling faces around him, Henry felt a deep sense of gratitude. The townhouse, once cold and intimidating, now pulsed with life and love. Sarah, with her radiant smile, represented his bright future. Tom, more mature and confident, was the family's pride. Melissa, bravely battling her illness, was an example of courage. And Holly, the beloved aunt, had become the heart of this reconstituted family. As the snow fell softly outside, inside the Dubois townhouse, the warmth of family love enveloped everyone. The laughter, the animated conversations, the aroma of dinner simmering in the kitchen, everything blended together to create an atmosphere of pure happiness. There, on that Christmas Eve, the promise of new beginnings hung in the air. The future, with all its possibilities. Henry and Sarah's upcoming wedding, Tom's promising career, Melissa's hopeful treatment, unfolded before them like a gift yet to be opened. The Dubois townhouse, once a symbol of the past, was now the perfect setting for the future they were building together. Each renovated room, each carefully chosen decoration, told the story of a family that had found its way back to each other. And so, amidst laughter and conversation, the exchanging of gifts and warm embraces, the Dubois family celebrated not just Christmas, but the rebirth of their bonds, the strength of their love, and the promise of even better days to come. The spring sun bathed the gardens of the New York Botanical Garden in a golden light as elegantly dressed guests gathered for the season's most anticipated event, the wedding of Henry Dubois and Sarah Walker. The air was filled with the fragrance of blooming flowers, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and emotion. Henry, impeccable in his groom's attire, waited anxiously at the flower-adorned altar. His eyes shone with anticipation, reflecting the winding path that had led him to this moment. Beside him, as best man, stood his loyal friend, Pierre, offering a reassuring smile. A murmur of admiration rippled through the crowd as the wedding procession began. Leading the way was young Tom, now almost 8 years old, proudly fulfilling his role as ring-bearer. Dressed in a miniature suit mirroring Henry's, the boy walked with a surprising dignity for his age, carrying the rings on a velvet cushion. Following close behind, Holly, Pierre's and Isabel's charming daughter, scattered rose petals along the aisle. Her golden curls bounced as she performed her task with a radiant smile, occasionally exchanging knowing glances with Tom. The procession continued with the bridesmaids, each a vision of elegance in their lavender dresses. Among them, Melissa stood out as the maid of honor. Her face glowed with happiness for her brother, but there was also a touch of nostalgia in her eyes, remembering the journey that had brought them all here. Finally, all eyes turned to the garden entrance, where Sarah appeared, breathtaking in her wedding gown. The design was a masterpiece by Mrs. Davis, combining classic American elegance with subtle French influences, symbolizing the union of not just two hearts, but two cultures. As Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Henry felt his heart quicken. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the turmoil of the past years seemed to dissipate, leaving only the pure, unwavering love they shared. The ceremony was conducted with a blend of American and French traditions, a testament to the couple's unique journey. As they exchanged vows, their words were more than promises. They were declarations of a devotion tested and strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Among the guests, seated in a place of honor, was Mrs. Davis. The now retired housekeeper watched with tears in her eyes, remembering the day a young Sarah had walked into Henry's life, unaware of the profound impact she would have. Not far away, Melissa's family observed the ceremony with a mix of emotions. Regret was evident on their faces, especially Elizabeth's, who finally understood the true meaning of family and unconditional love. Despite past tensions, their presence was a step towards reconciliation and forgiveness. After the exchange of rings and the kiss that sealed their union, Henry and Sarah turned to the crowd as husband and wife. The applause that erupted was deafening, a celebration not only of their love but of the resilience and strength they had shown. The reception that followed was a joyous spectacle. The Botanical Garden had never witnessed such a vibrant and lively celebration. Music flowed, blending American and French melodies, as guests danced and feasted on a culinary fusion honoring the couple's backgrounds. During the festivities, Henry made a point of publicly acknowledging Mrs. Davis. With a heartfelt toast, he thanked her not only for her unwavering support, but for her pivotal role in bringing him and Sarah together. Mrs. Davis, usually so composed, couldn't hold back tears of emotion at this recognition. As the evening progressed, it was time for the traditional father-son dance. Henry led Tom to the center of the dance floor, under the tender gaze of the guests. As they swayed to the music of a gentle waltz, Henry leaned down to speak to his son. "Tom," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "You know how special you are to Sarah and me, don't you?" The boy nodded, his large eyes fixed on his father's face. "From the day you came into our lives, you brought a light we didn't know was missing," Henry continued. "You taught us about unconditional love, about family, about what truly matters in life." Tom smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. "I love you and Mom Sarah," he said simply. Henry felt his heart swell with a wave of love so intense it almost took his breath away. "And we love you, son, more than you can imagine." As they continued to dance, Henry reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The hardships, the separations, the moments of doubt, all had contributed to strengthening the bonds that now united them as a true family. And across the room, Sarah watched the scene with tears of happiness in her eyes. Melissa approached her, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. "You did it, hi dear," Melissa said softly. "You not only found your place in this world, but you created a new home, a new family." Sarah smiled at her sister-in-law, now officially her sister. "It wouldn't have been possible without you, Melissa, without all of you." The two women watched as Henry lifted Tom into his arms, spinning him around, making the boy laugh with delight. It was a picture of pure happiness, a promise of a bright future. As the night wore on, the guests began to depart, leaving only the closest family and friends. Henry and Sarah found a moment of quiet, stepping away to a secluded corner of the gardens. Under the starlit New York sky, they embraced, feeling the weight and joy of this new chapter in their lives. "We did it, my love," Henry whispered, kissing Sarah's forehead softly. "Yes," she replied, her voice filled with emotion and promise. "And this is just the beginning." As they kissed under the moonlight, surrounded by the fragrance of flowers and the distant murmur of the celebration, Henry and Sarah knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. With Tom, with their extended family, and with the love they had nurtured through adversity, they were ready to write the next chapters of their story, a story of love, family, and the unbreakable bonds that united them. Snow fell softly on New York City, blanketing the city in a white, silent embrace. Inside the Dubois townhouse, lights twinkled through the windows, casting a warm glow on Christmas Eve. A year had passed since Henry and Sarah's wedding, and life seemed to have found a harmonious rhythm that no one would have predicted a few years earlier. Melissa, radiant and full of life, helped Holly decorate the enormous Christmas tree in the main hall. The experimental treatment had been a success, and she was now officially in remission. Her face, once pale and tired, now glowed with health and happiness. "Aunt Melissa, do you think we should put more lights here?" Holly asked, holding a long string of twinkling fairy lights. Melissa laughed, a sound that filled the hall with joy. "Darling, I think we have enough lights to illuminate all of Manhattan." Across the room, Tom and Sarah sat on the sofa, browsing through a baby name book. Sarah, with her 6-month baby bump, gently caressed her belly while Tom suggested increasingly extravagant names, making her laugh. "How about Theodore?" Tom suggested with a mischievous grin. Sarah pretended to consider for a moment before replying, Maybe for the next one. How about something more classic, like William?" Tom nodded in approval. "William Dubois. I like it." Tom's decision to live part-time with Henry and Sarah had been an easy one. He spent half the month in New York and half in London, where he continued his studies. The arrangement had brought father and son even closer, strengthening a bond that, though late in blooming, was deep and unwavering. In the kitchen, Mrs. Davis supervised the Christmas Eve dinner preparations. At 70, she had officially retired from housekeeping, but she remained the heart of the Dubois family. To Tom and Holly, she was the grandmother they had never had, always ready with wise advice or a comforting hug. "Henry, dear," Mrs. Davis called, "could you taste the gravy, please? I think it needs a pinch of nutmeg." Henry entered the kitchen, smiling at the familiar scene. He tasted the gravy, closing his eyes in appreciation. Perfect as always, Mrs. Davis wouldn't change a thing. As the evening progressed, the family gathered in the living room. The fire crackled merrily in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tom and Holly, inseparable as ever, sat on the floor, playing a board game and laughing at some private joke. Henry watched the scene with a full heart. Who could have predicted, just a few years ago, that his life would take this turn? Fate, he thought, had mysterious ways of bringing people together. "A penny for your thoughts," Sarah said softly, sitting down beside him. Henry smiled, pulling her close. "Just reflecting on how blessed we are. Look at us, Sarah. This family we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed of having." Sarah nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's a miracle, isn't it? Our own Christmas miracle." When it came time to exchange gifts, Tom approached Henry with a carefully wrapped package. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I made this for you." Henry carefully opened the package, revealing a beautifully bound photo album. As he flipped through the pages, his breath caught in his throat. There were pictures of Tom from infancy to his current age of 8, all the memories Henry had missed. "Oh, Tom," Henry whispered, tears streaming freely down his face. This is the most precious gift I've ever received." Tom hugged his father tightly. "Now you have all my memories, Dad, and we can make new ones together." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as everyone watched the touching moment between father and son. As the night wore on, the family gathered around the Christmas tree. Melissa led everyone in a Christmas carol, her clear, strong voice echoing through the room. Mrs. Davis handed out steaming mugs of hot chocolate, while Holly and Tom took turns reading "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Finally, when the moon was high in the sky and the children's eyes were starting to droop, Henry gathered everyone for one last tradition. "Christmas story time," he announced, settling into the large armchair by the fireplace. Tom and Holly snuggled at his feet, while Sarah sat on the arm of the chair, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Melissa and Mrs. Davis occupied the nearby sofa, smiles of anticipation on their faces. Henry opened an old book, its pages yellowed with age. But instead of reading, he closed the book and looked at his family. "Or this year," he began, "I want to tell a different story, the story of how fate brought this family together, of how love can overcome any obstacle, and how miracles happen when we least expect them." And so, with the snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling merrily in the fireplace, Henry began to tell their story, the story of a lonely man who found a family, of a boy who gained a father, of a woman who brought love and light into their lives, of siblings united by heart, not blood, of an aunt who became a second mother, and of a wise housekeeper who became the heart of them all. As Henry spoke, each member of the family relived their own memories, their own journeys that had led them to this perfect moment. And there, on that Christmas Eve, surrounded by the love and warmth of their rebuilt family, they all felt the magic of the true Christmas spirit, the miracle of love, family, and the unbreakable bonds that united them. When Henry finished his story, the silence that followed was filled with emotion and gratitude. Tom and Holly had fallen asleep, their heads resting on their father's knees. Sarah wiped away silent tears, while Melissa and Mrs. Davis exchanged knowing glances of affection. In that moment, Henry knew for certain this was the true miracle of Christmas, the miracle of a family united by love, overcoming all adversity. And as the clock struck midnight, officially ushering in Christmas Day, the Dubois townhouse radiated peace and happiness, a beacon of hope and love on a cold winter's night in New York City.